So news has broke that Joshua Zirkzee is looking to leave Manchester United in January, which doesn't actually sound like too much of a surprise. He's basically been part of the patented, almost famous, infamous Ruben Amorim bomb squad. But we can't pretend like he's exactly pulled up trees, even though he's 6'4" since he's been here. But for me, I'm guilty of being one of those aesthetic lovers and almost technical ability appreciators in a footballing climate that is basically favouring physical specimens and how far you can run and how fast you can run and how strong you are in duels. Zirkzee is someone that I had a little bit of a guilty pleasure for. I'm not going to lie. That might sound like a mad statement if you take it the wrong way, but I am not going to pause. But anyway, Zirkzee is a footballer that I've appreciated because he offered something a bit different. I think we all saw that the false nine, almost like pseudo nine, can work in the Premier League because we saw it work with Bobby Firmino. But you could argue that sometimes you need the profiles around him for that to be successful. But in terms of Joshua Zirkzee and his output, I think he's had 7 goals and 2 assists in around 53 Premier League games. I'm not sure how many of those were actual full 90s. It's not exactly the type of output that you'd be wanting from your striker, though. And I think some of the criticism that he's received has been a little bit lessened than the Højlund one because he was less than half the money. But you know, when you sign for United as a striker, people are going to want to see a return on your goals. I'm not quite sure he's ever been put in the correct type of conditions and environment to kind of marry with his skill set and succeed. But he has had some shortcomings in terms of, that were question marks before he came here, was his ball striking ability, his aerial ability for his height, and also his ability to separate from defenders in terms of his speed and physicality. And even the technical side of his game, which I think after a rough first couple months where he almost had to acclimatise to the Premier League and the speed of it and almost get fit, because I think when he first came, he didn't look fit. He looked a little bit heavy, looked a bit stodgy. I think people getting onto him saying he needs to chill out on the creams a little bit. But when he actually got a few games and got up to speed, I kind of did see the value that he could provide you. And unfortunately, in a game now where it probably almost pays to be a bit of a generalist, when you sign specialists like Zirkzee, it becomes redundant to sign him and use him if you're not going to use him the way that gets the best out of him, which is as a 10. And he's almost like too big to be a 10 when you look at him from an optic standpoint. But he almost doesn't have that goal scoring like repertoire almost to be an out-and-out 9. So he's almost like a 9.5, which almost became a little bit of a gimmick towards Zirkzee, especially during the early times. But for me, I feel like he almost did work as a bit of a backboard and someone that could get us up the pitch and can be hard. I did want to see how him, Mainoo and Mbeumo would work, because Mbeumo's that guy that can run in and around him, running behind him, almost a la his relationship that Mbeumo had with Ivan Toney. Because I think there's similarities between Ivan Toney and Zirkzee's game, but Ivan Toney's has that aerial ability, has that ball strike, and is more of a finisher. So that's why he's a superior player, and that's the reason why we're so successful. But unfortunately, we haven't really seen Zirkzee played with the type of, almost like, with the system, but also with the relationships and almost like complementary profiles around him for him to be successful. I'm not going to sit here and be disingenuous to him and act like he's not a good footballer. I watch him and I can straight away see quality. I can see talent. I can see technique. I can see things that are usable, stuff that are of value. Like I thought what made him so intriguing to me was, if you do have a bit of a Šeško Højlund profile, like a big lumbering strikers with pace and power, that if United need to go at something a little bit different, you've got a Zirkzee there. So that you almost have something that's a bit of an alternative. But even that hasn't worked out. And I think when you've got, I don't want to be too cheeky when I talk about his physical ability and appearance, but I think there's certain footballers where if they aren't playing week in, week out, and they are being bit part, they're never really going to be that sharp. They almost need to be like playing all the time to maintain that sharpness. And with Zirkzee, I think because he's just been in and out and never really been able to nail down a place, when he's getting these little 20-minute, 25-minute cameos to kind of assert himself and make a claim, he's had some decent ones, but I don't think you're ever going to see the best of him that way. Maybe he's just not suited to the Premier League. That could be another angle. When he goes back to Serie A, which he was successful, 12 goals and 6 assists for Bologna under Thiago Motta, which got him his move, got him his interest. He's played for Bayern Munich in the past. So we can't pretend like there isn't talent there, but it just hasn't worked. Højlund hasn't worked. Zirkzee hasn't worked. And when we don't have any European football out of the EFL Cup, you can't really see where his minutes are going to come. So I don't think Zirkzee is going to be end of the almost like cut and chopping board list or the chopping list going into January, especially when footballers like him, which has been reported, are in and around the national squad, and you've got a World Cup in the summer. And when you're playing in a team and a manager that doesn't really have any use for you, you need to start thinking about your career. Where will he go? Who knows? How much will we get for him is another factor. But when you bought him for 34 million, I think the layoff almost of flipping him for less, it does hurt a little bit less than when you'd get Rasmus Højlund for 75 plus. I don't think that's the actual accurate figure. And then it's plummeted. It might be a loan, to be fair, but when the value gets plummeted so much, it makes selling so difficult, because on the books are going to be the opposite of balanced. It almost like ruins you with this FFP, PSR football world that we're living in. But sometimes I think this two year you got to almost cement yourself as a first team player, otherwise you're sold, which is what Omar Barada was trying to implement, which I think is something that United haven't been ruthless enough throughout the years. I think you got a year and a half, 2 years. I can't even be exact with how long he's been here, but I think he's had enough to know whether he's got time to basically become a squad player at the very least. I might be slightly biased. I think Zirkzee is a great footballer, and I see abilities and values in his game that could work. I just don't think they're going to work under this manager, and I don't think they're going to work for this team. And unfortunately, there might be question marks over how much it works in this today's Premier League that we're seeing, which doesn't value technical ability as much. And unfortunately, people like Zirkzee and that profile of player, they find themselves wanting. Could talk about his work rate, can talk about him looking a bit lumbering and lethargic and laid back, almost something that fans didn't like about Martial. Could mention those things, but I think some of the treatment that he got early on from the fan base was disgusting. Thought when he was booed off, when he was hooked before half time, was one of the serious lows of Manchester United in the last few years, which is incredible because I've seen players that have done much worse than him and been a lot more offensive to the football club, get cheered week in, week out. So that was one of the most distasteful things that I've seen in years. And it did hurt me, that, as a United fan, to see. Especially when you saw the likes of Garnacho disrespecting his club and teammates, and he's still getting Viva Garnacho chants and cheered off at the end of the season. I think people just pick and choose, don't they? And when you come to his character, you can't go wrong with Zirkzee. Brilliant character, lovely guy, well-liked, bit of a gel within the changing rooms, and those players can be very important because the dynamic of a changing room and the relationships between people and the team morale can give you those extra 1 or 2% that end up being a successful football club. So you'll be a massive loss when it comes to that, but I can see why him departing probably makes sense for all parties. But I have enjoyed some of the football that I've seen from him. I remember the 4-0, where he got a goal, maybe a couple of assists, when it was him, Ahmad and Rashford when we beat Everton 4-0 at home. And I thought that was his best performance in a United shirt. And you could see just how, just the qualities that he does have. But unfortunately, at the top level, it's not necessarily always about the ceiling of your performances. It's almost about how consistent your floor of performances is. It's no good being great one week and being average for a few and then great one week. Consistency matters and consistency pays. But it's just not worked with Zirkzee. And it's going to be sad to see him go. But it's probably right from all around. You can let me know what you think, but I think he won't be the last one that ends up departing. Even Mainu's come out and said he's probably looking to go out on a low move, which is the only saving grace, that he's not going to be trying to leave permanently. But that's with Zirkzee, 7 goals, 2 assists, 53 odd games. For a striker without the finishing and instincts and ball striking ability, it's always going to be a struggle. But Zirkzee, I enjoyed you. Just thought I'd say my little 2 pence on him. Let me know what you think about Zirkzee's time here, whether you'd like to see him given more of a chance, whether you think it is right for us to cut ties and try and sell him and see how much we can recoup for him and move on. Or do you think having a backup striker possibly leave is going to perfect in us later on in the season in case there's injuries? But obviously, Zirkzee's got to think about himself. But let me know what you think. Remember to like, comment, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.